Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room buzzed with clipped voices, boots scuffing against the floor, the sharp shuffle of maps and dossiers. Screens glowed with terrain data and satellite feeds, red lines cutting across hostile ground. Men leaned forward, pointing, talking over one another with the confidence of people who assumed they belonged. And she sat 3 chairs down, hands folded too tightly in her lap, throat dry, words trembling before they even reached her lips, was invisible. Or maybe worse than invisible. Dismissed. Her commander didn't glance her way. The older sergeants didn't ask for her input. Even the new recruits, barely shaved, carried themselves with the surety she lacked. Every nod passed over her, every question leapt around her, until her silence filled the air heavier than the gun oil smell clinging to their uniforms. She wanted to speak. God, she wanted to say something. Her eyes tracked the map, a valley system scarred with dry riverbeds. The enemy had been pushing through, vanishing into the labyrinth of gullies. Everyone talked about airstrikes, about drones sweeping the ridges, but no one saw what she saw. Not yet. Her tongue touched her teeth. If she spoke, it would shake. If she stayed silent, nothing would change. Her chest rose with one shallow breath, then another. She leaned forward. "Ma'am." The single word sliced across her hesitation. A corporal at the far end, one of the eager ones, was already proposing his plan. Her mouth shut again. The window closed. She sat back, her voice swallowed whole by the noise. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Something about that valley. She could still smell it. Dust baked into her hair, the metallic taste of her own blood. A memory she buried but couldn't shake. The last time she was there, she wasn't a soldier with rank or training or weapons. She was a daughter, a sister, a survivor of a night that rewired every nerve in her body. And if the mission went the way they were planning, she knew exactly what would happen. She lowered her gaze, fingers locking tighter, her pulse hammering. Not now, not here. The meeting ended with brisk orders, clipped affirmations, boots scraping against tile. She rose last, moving with the others but apart from them, her silence tucked under the noise of men already convinced of their strategy. But silence doesn't mean surrender. Later, as they filed out under fluorescent lights, one of the younger operators, Martinez, 19, freckles barely out of boyhood, slowed beside her. "You didn't say much in there," he whispered, almost apologetic. Her lips twitched into a half-smile. "Wasn't asked." His brows furrowed like he didn't understand. He wouldn't, not yet. She walked on. The echo of boots down the hallway trailed behind her like ghosts. Outside, the night air struck cool against her face. A single floodlight hummed above the compound yard, insects orbiting its glow. She exhaled, and the breath clouded in the crisp darkness. She had trained years for this, bled for this. Every mile run in boots too heavy, every bruise from hands that didn't believe in her, every time she was told to go back, to sit down, to quit, led here. And still, when the moment came to speak, her voice betrayed her. Trembling small. But action did not tremble. She walked toward the barracks, each step heavier than the last. Sleep didn't come. Not really. She lay in the narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling fan slicing shadows across plaster, listening to the cough of diesel generators outside, the occasional bark of a stray dog near the perimeter wire. Her heart drummed too loud for rest. Her mind replayed maps and lines, valleys and ridges, until the memory crept back again, the one she had shoved behind silence at the table. The valley. She was younger then, still civilian, still someone's little girl. The war was smoke on the horizon, a rumor turned into thunder. And then one night the thunder came down into the valley with fire. She remembered screams swallowed by rock walls, her brother's hand tearing from hers, the world collapsing into dust and light. No one else here knew that story. She never told them. But she remembered where the gullies split, where the ridges choked supply lines, where the hidden caves carved sanctuaries no satellite could see. She knew the valley in her bones because it had broken her once, and she swore it would not break anyone else. The next morning was merciless sun, heat pressing down like a hand over the desert. Convoy engines growled as they lined up, their armored hulls already dust-streaked. Men laughed too loudly, the kind of humor that tried to mask nerves. A helicopter thudded overhead, rotor wash sending grit into every crevice. She adjusted the strap of her rifle, the weight steady against her shoulder. Sweat traced her spine under the vest. Martinez walked past, flashing her a grin too young for the place they were headed. She forced a nod. "Ready?" one of the sergeants barked at her. It wasn't really a question. She answered anyway, "Always." Her voice was steady this time. The convoy rolled out, steel grinding against rock, engines straining against incline. Dust billowed in waves, painting the sky in pale brown haze. She sat in the back, helmet tilted low, fingers drumming against the stock of her weapon. Around her, men spoke in clipped sentences, jokes, curses, small talk about home, threads of humanity in the iron cage of war. She said nothing, she listened. One of the older men beside her, Hawkins, rubbed the scar across his jaw. "You ever get used to it?" he muttered, not looking at her. She tilted her head. "Used to what?" "The waiting," he said. "The silence before it starts. Sometimes it's louder than the fight itself." She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between them, thick as dust. Finally she whispered, "No, you don't." He nodded, as if her answer mattered. The convoy rattled deeper into the valley. The walls rose higher, red stone cliffs cutting them off from horizon. Shadows swallowed the light. The map the commanders had traced last night played in her head, but so did hers, the memory map carved from fire and fear years ago. Every turn tightened her chest. Every curve felt like déjà vu. And then she saw it. Not obvious, not to untrained eyes, but on the ridge a flicker too sharp, too still, the glint of something metal catching the sun. Her stomach clenched, she leaned forward. "Stop," she hissed. No one moved. "Stop," louder this time. Her hand slapped against the armor wall. The driver braked hard, the convoy lurching. Shouts rose, curses flying, men glaring at her like she'd lost her mind. "What the hell's your problem?" someone snapped. Her pulse pounded, she pointed to the ridge. "Second gully left side, there." They squinted, nothing, just rock and heat haze. But then another glint, a shadow shifting. The first shot cracked before anyone breathed. Stone exploded near the lead vehicle. Echoes ripped across the valley. Chaos surged. Men ducked, scrambled, shouted. Rifles bristled against empty rock. But she was already moving. Her rifle pressed against her shoulder, eye locked down the scope, breath shallow. She saw them, half camouflaged in stone, rifles fixed on the convoy. Her fingers squeezed. One fell, then another. The valley erupted in fire. Engines roared, bullets sliced air, stone shattered into dust clouds. The sound was deafening, metal shrieks, shouted orders, the thunder of return fire. The air stank of cordite, of burning oil. She didn't hear her own shots, only saw bodies tumble from the ridge. Her hands steadied where her voice had failed the night before. Martinez yelled something, dragging one man back behind cover. Hawkins barked into the comm, calling for air support, but in the chaos she found focus. Every motion was precise, every shot deliberate. The trembling that plagued her words did not touch her trigger. She remembered the map in her mind, the hidden gully to their right, the cave mouth beyond the ridge. That's where they'd move, she knew it. That's where the next wave waited. She tore the radio from her vest. "They're moving to flank East Ridge, through the cave mouth." No one asked how she knew, not in the middle of fire. Orders shifted, weapons swung. The convoy adjusted, covering angles. Her warning bought them seconds, and seconds meant lives. By the time air support roared overhead, the fight had already turned. The enemy broke, scattered into gullies, chased by dust and fire. Silence returned, broken only by the ringing in their ears. Martinez stumbled toward her, face streaked with grit and sweat, eyes wide. "How the hell did you see that?" Her chest heaved. She swallowed. Words caught in her throat, but this time she forced them out. "I've been here before." No one asked more, not yet. But they looked at her differently now. The valley wasn't just stone and shadow anymore. It was her battlefield. And for the first time, her silence had spoken louder than their noise. She stood alone, dust settling in the valley air, her rifle still warm against her palms. Around her, men coughed through the haze, checking wounds, swapping curses and half-relieved laughter. Someone was crying quietly, one of the drivers who had taken shrapnel, his leg torn but not gone. Martinez knelt beside him, hands shaking as he tried to wrap gauze too quickly. Hawkins moved slower, deliberate, muttering reassurance as if his voice could hold the boy together better than bandages could. But she wasn't looking at them. Her eyes fixed on the ridge, the one she had pointed at seconds before the first shot cracked, the place where fire once fell years ago, where her brother's hand slipped away forever. The memory pressed hard against her ribs. A taste of iron filled her mouth, though she wasn't bleeding. She turned away. Duty meant no room for ghosts. Still, as the medics moved, as the radio crackled with higher-ups demanding sitreps, as men who had dismissed her just an hour ago now glanced her way with something different in their eyes. Respect, confusion, maybe even gratitude. She felt no pride. Only wait. The silence after gunfire is its own battlefield. Back at the compound that night, the debrief was sharper, voices lower, tempered by what had nearly gone wrong. Maps lay spread again, but this time her chair did not vanish under the noise. Eyes flicked to her. A question hovered in the room but never quite asked. How did you know? She gave them only pieces, enough to shape strategy, not enough to reveal the scar tissue underneath. She said she'd studied terrain, cross-referenced topography with old migration routes. Technical answers, believable ones. The truth, screams echoing across the same ridges, remained hers alone. As the officers spoke, as the sergeants argued over air support timing, she sat quieter than ever, her voice only surfacing when necessary. The trembling was still there, but thinner now. Each word tested the air. Each word found footing. And yet, when the meeting broke, she didn't walk out with the others. She lingered, staring at the map long after boots scraped away. A voice startled her. "You've been here before." She looked up. Colonel Jameson stood in the doorway. Older, grayer, his presence filling the frame like stone fills a canyon. He wasn't asking, he was stating. Her throat worked, "Sir." His eyes narrowed. "That ridge, that cave mouth, you called it before anyone else, not instinct, memory." She said nothing. He stepped closer, his boots heavy against tile. "You don't have to tell me, but you should know carrying ghosts into battle can cut both ways. They sharpen you or they break you." Her fingers tightened against the map edge. The paper crinkled. "I know," she whispered. His gaze lingered, then softened just enough. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. Tomorrow isn't lighter than today." He left her with the map, with the silence, with herself. Sleep again did not come. She lay in darkness, listening to Martinez, a bunk over shifting restlessly, Hawkins snoring in his corner, other men muttering in dreams. But her mind roamed far from the compound walls. She saw her brother's face again, saw the fire, saw herself crawling from rubble, nails broken, lungs choking. She remembered the silence afterward when no one came for her. She had walked alone out of that valley, barefoot, hollow-eyed, carrying nothing but the memory. It was why she enlisted, why she trained harder than anyone, why she stayed when others left, not for glory, not for revenge, but because she couldn't leave others to that silence. The next mission came faster than rest. Dawn painted the compound in pale blue, the air sharp with chill before the desert heat. Briefing again, maps again. But this time when her voice entered the room, it didn't vanish. She pointed to supply routes, suggested overwatch points where snipers could counter hidden ridges. Her words weren't long, they weren't loud, but they landed, men nodded, they listened. And when the convoy rolled out again, she was assigned forward observation. The valley widened, then split into forks like veins. Her vehicle climbed one ridge, dust spraying, engine growling. From up here she saw it all, the twisted gullies, the caves like mouths in stone, the echo of danger everywhere. Her scope scanned, her heart stayed tight. Hours passed in silence. Sweat streaked her temple, her body rigid against the rifle. Below, the convoy pushed through, wheels grinding against rock. Radios crackled, clipped words in static. Nothing moved. But still she felt it. The valley was never empty. Her eyes caught something, tiny at first. A stone tumbling where no boot should be. She stilled her breath, tracking the shadow. Then she saw them. Not dozens this time, hundreds. Emerging from caves like ants from soil, weaving through gullies, spreading wide with rifles and launchers glinting under sun. They were waiting for the convoy to choke itself into the narrowest stretch, an ambush too large to fight head-on. Her finger pressed the radio. They're massing, East Gully, multiple squads, you need to halt now. Static crackled, say again. She swallowed hard, louder, clearer. Ambush incoming, East Gully, scale larger than last contact. Halt convoy and reposition or they'll cut you to pieces. The line went dead for half a second. Then, copy, adjusting route. Engines roared below, vehicles grinding into reverse, dust clouds rising. Shouts pierced the air. And from her vantage, she fired the first shot. One down, two, three. Each echo rolled across stone. The enemy scattered, forced to reveal themselves too early. The convoy below veered wide, gunners unleashing fire across ridges. Air support scrambled, engines screaming toward coordinates. She kept shooting, breath steady, mind locked, every shot a wall between the convoy and the ghost she remembered. Beside her, Martinez clung to binoculars, his hands trembling. "How do you do it?" he muttered. Her eye never left the scope. Do what? Stay calm. She exhaled. I'm not calm, I'm just not leaving them to silence. He didn't understand, not fully, but his expression shifted, like maybe one day he would. The fight stretched into hours. Dust, heat, smoke, screams, all of it tangled into a blur of survival. And through it her trigger never failed, her voice on the radio never faltered. When the sun dipped, when air support carved the last enemy retreat into dust, when silence fell again, she lowered her rifle. Her hands shook then, not before, not during, only after. Martinez saw it. He didn't say a word. He just sat beside her on the ridge, staring at the smoke trails curling from the valley floor. You saved them, he whispered. She shook her head, not all of them. Because she could still see the bodies, still hear the ones who didn't make it, still carry the weight of their silence. Back at the compound, the mood shifted. No one ignored her at the table now. No one questioned when her finger traced maps. She didn't ask for the respect. They gave it quietly, wordlessly, with nods and sidelong glances. But respect wasn't what she came for. She sat alone outside that night, under stars sharp enough to cut skin. Wind brushed sand across her boots, and in that solitude she let her chest heave, her hands cover her face, her body fold just enough to release what she held inside. No one saw, no one needed to. Because tomorrow she would stand again. Not for pride, not for recognition, but for the promise she'd made the night she crawled from fire and silence. No one else walks alone out of this valley. And for the first time in years, her trembling voice no longer felt like weakness. It felt like proof she was still human. Why was the convoy slowing again? Her pulse hitched. Dust clouds rose ahead, a familiar shimmer on the horizon, but this time it wasn't just heat haze. Something moved in the shadows of the gullies, something deliberate, calculated. She pressed herself lower against the ridge, rifle trained, breath tight. Behind her, the convoy muttered complaints, engines whining under load, men uneasy. She didn't blame them. The valley had teeth and it was always hungry. Her eyes caught the movement first, a glint of metal camouflage that didn't quite match the rock, a flicker of intent. Her gut told her they were waiting to hit the convoy where it would hurt most. East flank, she breathed into the radio, voice steady despite the tremor that still lingered inside. Enemy reinforcements, hidden positions, prepare for contact. Silence, then static, then clipped acknowledgement. The convoy adjusted, rifles swiveled, men pressed tighter against armored walls. She didn't relax, she never relaxed. Years of training had taught her to expect the worst, to anticipate the chaos before it fell. But experience alone couldn't erase memory. The way her brother's screams had been swallowed by stone, the way she had run while the world burned, the way nothing had been waiting for her except the valley itself. She swallowed, the taste of iron lingered again. Her binoculars scanned the ridge, and there it was, a line of enemy positions stretching like black veins across the rocky ridges. Snipers, machine gunners, a few carrying heavier launchers. Their discipline was precise. They'd learned from the last engagement, or maybe they were born to it. Her fingers tightened on the rifle. "Lieutenant, what do you see?" Martinez's voice came over the comm, anxious. "Positions, they've got flanks covered. We need suppressive fire before we move," she said, forcing certainty into her words. She added almost to herself, "and cover the civilians if they're still in range. God help us." Her heart clenched at the thought. Civilians. Another memory tried to claw its way into her mind, a family, a market, a scream, but she pushed it down. Focus. She couldn't save ghosts again. Not today. The convoy halted, engines idling, armored plates shivering in the morning sun. Her scope tracked the ridge. She counted, calculated, predicted. The enemy would strike in under a minute if they weren't careful. "Ready," she whispered. Her rifle barked. One down, two, three. The sound ricocheted across the rocks. Shadows fell from the ridges as gunfire erupted, dust spiking with each impact. Chaos followed. Men shouted, rifles cracked, engines roared. She stayed low, methodical, guiding shots, marking targets, her voice steady in the calm. Martinez followed her direction, Hawkins coordinating movement from the back of the convoy. Together, they held the line, not with bravado, but with precision. The ambush was sharp, brutal, but she had been ready. Even so, a vehicle took a hit. Explosions rocked the convoy. Smoke curled into the sky. Men yelled, trapped between rocks and bullets. Her pulse raced. The trembling that haunted her voice wanted to break free, but she bit it down, buried it behind sightlines and finger pressure. Action didn't tremble. Her mind flashed with the memory she hadn't shared. The night the valley had tried to swallow her whole. She had been alone then, crawling through rubble, dragging herself over broken stones while fire licked the sky. Her brother had been gone, and she had been nothing but a trembling voice lost in the chaos. She would not be lost again. A flare shot up from the convoy. Air support overhead marked the ridge. Engines roared louder. Bullets tore through stone. She moved, guiding the convoy's fire. Each command was clipped, careful, calculated. She felt the heat from a nearby vehicle that had taken a hit and kept her distance. The men followed, some trusting her direction, some unsure, all fighting for survival. The fight stretched on, hours bleeding into one another. Her body was taut with exertion. Sweat burned her eyes. Muscles ached. Yet she pressed on. She could not stop, not while the enemy waited, not while the convoy teetered on the edge of disaster, not while any of them, any of her people, relied on her to see the danger before it struck. Then came a silence so sharp, she thought the valley had swallowed sound itself. The enemy had retreated, at least for now. She slumped against a rock, eyes closing briefly. She did not speak. She could not. Martinez knelt beside her, voice tentative. "Lieutenant, you saved us again." She shook her head slowly. "I just knew." He frowned. "Knew how?" Her chest tightened. "Because I've walked these valleys before, because I survived them. That's all you need to know." He stared, uncomprehending. Hawkins placed a hand on his shoulder, muttering, "Don't question it. Just thank her and live." The convoy regrouped. Men checked weapons, reloaded, treated minor wounds. The wounded were stabilized. The valley remained harsh, silent, but for the first time that day, it felt like the odds had shifted just slightly in their favor. She allowed herself a small exhale, the first real one in hours. Later in the compound, debriefing was quieter. No one questioned her movements this time. They recorded her observations, her commands, her kills, her calculations. Praise was careful, understated, enough to acknowledge her skill without making her a spectacle. She didn't need applause, never had. She only needed the men to survive, the convoy to make it through, and the valley to be just a battlefield, not a grave. But alone in her quarters, the weight returned. The memory of fire, screams, and loss pressed against her ribs. She traced the scars along her hands and arms, remembering nights she had spent awake, listening to phantom cries. She wondered if she would ever be free of it. Sleep came in short bursts, nightmares breaking through. She saw her brother again. She saw the civilians she could not save. She saw herself crawling, trembling, alone. And yet she also saw herself now, rifle in hand, eyes sharp, commands clear, voice strong. The difference was action. Action didn't tremble. By the next day, orders came for a reconnaissance mission. The valley had shifted. Enemy movement suggested a new offensive, larger, smarter, more coordinated. Commanders needed eyes on the ground. She volunteered. No one stopped her. Her squad was smaller this time, 3 men and Martinez. They would move light, fast, unseen. She led not with bravado but with certainty. Every step measured, every shadow observed, every instinct tuned. They moved through gullies, over ridges, through caves she remembered from her past. The air smelled of dust and stone, of burned vegetation, of tension. Her heart stayed tight, controlled. Her voice, when necessary, was low, precise. The first signs of enemy presence were subtle. Footprints in sand, scraps of camouflage, the faint metallic smell of weapons. She traced them. Every movement spoke to her, told her where the enemy would strike, where they would hide, what they were planning. Hours passed. Sun climbed, burned, then dipped. Shadows lengthened. The squad moved with her guidance, trusting her eyes more than their own. And then at the canyon's bend, she froze. Something was wrong. A trap larger than before, heavier than before, too precise for a coincidence. Her pulse spiked. She signaled the squad to halt. Whispered commands passed silently. They spread out, covering angles she had never seen used before. The enemy emerged with a roar, guns blazing, grenades tumbling. And she acted. Every decision was instantaneous. Cover fire, suppression, flanking maneuvers. Her mind raced faster than bullets. Every instinct she had honed since childhood, since the valley first tore her life apart, guided her hands and eyes. Martinez ducked behind a boulder, firing as she directed. Hawkins coordinated their retreat, shouting into the radio. She guided each man, calculated each move, until the enemy staggered under their counterattack. The battle was brutal, close, personal. Each explosion echoed her memories. Each scream mirrored the night she had been left behind. But this time she was not alone. They survived. By dusk, the valley fell silent again. Dust settled, blood dried, adrenaline ebbed. Her squad gathered, shaken, exhausted but alive. She lowered her rifle, shoulders heavy. For the first time she allowed herself to feel relief, not pride, relief. Martinez spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Lieutenant, you let us through that. You saved us again." She shook her head. "I didn't save myself, I just made sure you did." Hawkins put a hand on her shoulder. "You're not just a soldier, Lieutenant, you're something else. Something we don't get to see often, but today you carried us." She didn't answer. Words could not capture the weight of memory, the cost of survival, the trembling that had never truly left her. She only looked at the valley, setting sun painting the stone in deep red and gold, and whispered to herself, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." Why did the silence feel heavier than the gunfire? She crouched on the ridge, scanning the valley floor below, sun blinding her just enough to make shadows dance in deceptive ways. The convoy was gone, the immediate threat dispersed, but the weight of what had come before clung to her shoulders like armor she couldn't remove. Every crack of stone, every whisper of wind reminded her that the valley remembered her, and she remembered it. The mission had shifted. Reconnaissance was no longer simple observation. Now, intelligence suggested a planned offensive. Supplies were being moved, soldiers repositioned. Someone had to see it first. Someone had to act before the valley claimed more lives. She volunteered again. No one asked why, not this time, they didn't need to know. The squad was smaller, lighter, faster. Martinez, Hawkins, and two others she barely knew, fresh faces, new blood. She led without question, the responsibility pressing against her ribs. Every step through dust and rock was deliberate. Every glance over shoulder was measured. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something larger than last time. The ridge narrowed. Sunlight cut through the gullies, painting patterns on rock that reminded her of childhood games before fire, before loss. She blinked. Shadows stretched unnaturally. Something moved. Not fast enough to be natural, not slow enough to be benign. "Hold," she whispered, hand raised. Martinez froze. "What is it?" "Eyes on the ridge. East flank," she said, voice tight but controlled. She counted, adjusted, predicted. The enemy was there waiting, they always were. But the trap was different this time, more sophisticated, more calculated. The insurgents had learned. They had adapted. And she had to outthink them every step, every breath, every heartbeat. Her mind flashed to memory again. The valley years ago, fire licking her world, her brother's hand slipping, her own trembling voice swallowed by chaos. That trembling voice had survived. It had been small, weak, nearly broken. But her actions had not. And now she would act again. The squad moved like shadows under her guidance, silent, precise. Each motion calculated. She watched the enemy pattern, noted the weak points, predicted the first strike. Then it came. Gunfire, explosion, shouts. She acted instantly. Cover fire, suppression, positioning. Her voice in the comms was calm, clipped, guiding Martinez and the others. Left flank, move low, don't expose. Hawkins, cover rear. Bullets ripped through the valley, dust spiraled, rocks shattered. Her mind raced faster than the bullets, faster than the enemy could anticipate. And still a thought intruded. What if they fall anyway? No time, no room for doubt. Not here, not now. She fired, each shot deliberate, each breath measured, each command precise. Every action echoed the same lesson she had learned as a child. The trembling voice mattered less than the hand that acted. One of the fresh recruits went down, a sharp cry cutting through the chaos. Martinez moved to cover, hands shaking, eyes wide. She fired at the ridge clearing line of sight and yelled, "Don't freeze, cover him." Hawkins shouted, coordinating retreat, suppressing fire, keeping the squad alive. By midday, the valley had become a crucible. Heat pressed down, dust clung to sweat-slick skin. Every shot echoed through rock walls, reverberating like memory. Her body was taut, muscles screaming, but she did not falter, not once. Then she saw movement she hadn't predicted, reinforcements coming from the southern ridge, a squad larger than their own. Their coordination was precise, methodical. The valley seemed alive with enemies she hadn't known were there. She whispered into the radio, voice taut. "Southern Ridge. Reinforcements. Estimated 40 enemy. Prepare suppressive fire and hold position. Do not advance until I give the order." The radio clicked. Static confirmation. The squad moved like one body under her guidance. She counted, predicted, adjusted. Every movement deliberate, every shot measured. Hours stretched, sun descending toward the horizon. The heat waned, shadows lengthened, and the enemy pressed harder. But she anticipated. She acted. The squad followed, lives hinging on her decisions. Finally, at twilight, the valley fell silent again. Dust settled, blood dried, adrenaline ebbed. They had survived. But the cost weighed on her. Martinez approached, face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Lieutenant, you let us through that. You saved us." She shook her head. "I didn't save myself. I just made sure you did." Hawkins, older, seasoned, muttered, "You're not just a soldier, you're something else. Something we rarely see. Today you carried us." She didn't answer. Words could not capture the weight of memory, the cost of survival, the trembling that had never truly left her. She only looked at the valley, setting sun painting stone in deep red and gold, and whispered to herself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The valley had been conquered, not by weapons alone, but by resilience, memory, and the will to act when trembling voices would have failed. The night brought uneasy rest. Dreams stirred memories of fire and screams, yet also of the faces she had saved. She lay awake, counting every breath, replaying every decision, every shot, every command. Each action a thread in the tapestry of survival she was weaving. In the quiet, she thought about why she had enlisted. Not for glory, not for recognition, for survival, for others. To ensure no one else experienced the silence of abandonment that had haunted her youth. By morning, orders came again. Intelligence suggested the enemy was consolidating, preparing for a counteroffensive. She was called to plan the next move, to guide strategy with the insight she alone possessed. In the debriefing room, eyes followed her. Not curiosity this time, not doubt, not dismissal. Respect, careful and measured, lingered. No one needed to ask the question, how did she know? They had seen. She presented her strategy, pointing to ridges, caves, hidden gullies. Her words were concise, tactical. She did not reveal the memories behind the insight. Not yet. After the meeting, she lingered outside, alone under the morning sky. Wind teased her hair, dust rose from the dry compound ground. She closed her eyes. She whispered to herself softly, "No one else walks alone in this valley." Her voice trembled just a little, but the promise held steady. Why did the morning feel like the calm, before a storm she could already hear? The sun rose over the valley in pale gold, spilling light across jagged ridges and dust-choked gullies. The convoy had moved on, regrouped, but she remained on the high ridge, binoculars in hand, scanning the terrain. Her squad moved behind her, silent, tense, every step measured. She sensed it before anyone else. Not by sight, not by sound. Something in the valley shifted, a weight, an intention, a presence. "Lieutenant, you feel that too, right?" Martinez's voice trembled, betraying nerves he had tried to hide. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes never left the ridge opposite them where shadows pooled unnaturally. The wind whispered through rocks, carrying the faint metallic tang of weapons. Something was coming, something bigger, something personal. Her pulse quickened, not just fear but memory. The valley had taken more than lives. It had taken her voice, her innocence, her brother, and now it threatened those who followed her into its grasp. The enemy emerged before she could warn the others. Not in waves this time, but in a single, deliberate strike. From the southern ridge, a unit she hadn't anticipated descended with precision, firing as they moved, forcing the squad to scatter. "Ambush," she shouted, voice sharp, commanding. Her rifle barked. One fell, another. She counted mentally, anticipating the rest. Martinez ducked behind a boulder, eyes wide. "They're too many." Then we'll make them smaller, she snapped, voice steady despite adrenaline hammering in her chest. Cover me, move left, suppressive fire. The valley erupted in chaos, dust, bullets, shouted commands, the screech of metal against stone. She moved with deliberate calm, leading the squad through cover, directing fire, marking enemy positions. Every step was a memory of survival, every shot a lesson learned from nights spent crawling through rubble, fire licking the edges of her world. And then she saw him. A figure standing apart from the rest, watching, waiting, calm, calculated. Her stomach clenched. Recognition didn't come immediately, but instinct screamed the truth. He had been there before, not just in this valley, but in the shadows of her past. The world shrank. The enemy faded into peripheral chaos. Her mind honed in on the single figure, trained, precise, almost familiar. Lieutenant, Martinez's voice cut through her focus. She shook her head slightly. Don't let him move, just hold positions. The figure made a slow, deliberate step. She raised her rifle, sighting, heart pounding, fingers steady. Who is he? Martinez whispered. She didn't answer, she couldn't, not yet, not aloud. The enemy pressed harder. She fired, directing her squad, forcing the unit to retreat. But her attention never left him. The memory surged, the valley years ago, fire and screams, the night she had lost everything. The moment that had shaped her every decision, every action since. He had been there, watching, waiting, and now, after years of silence, he had returned. The squad followed her lead, moving as one, but she felt detached. Every shot she took, every command she gave was tempered by the past, by memory, by the presence of the man she had thought gone forever. Hours passed in a blur of sun and gunfire, dust and blood. By dusk, the enemy had retreated. The valley was silent again, but she did not feel relief. She lowered her rifle, knees shaking, breath coming in ragged pulls. Martinez stared at her, unsure whether to speak. Hawkins put a hand on her shoulder, a silent reassurance. Lieutenant, Martinez began, voice trembling. That man, who is he? Her chest tightened. She didn't answer, not yet, not in front of the others. Later, in the quiet of the compound, she finally allowed herself to breathe, to close her eyes and remember. He had been a shadow in her childhood, a soldier in the first skirmishes she had survived, the one who had observed, judged, and left her to crawl through the valley alone. She had survived, yes, but the memory of his watchful eyes had haunted her every mission since. Now he was back, and the valley would not forgive her inaction. The next day, intelligence suggested a planned offensive by the enemy, a counterattack that could overwhelm the convoy if unanticipated. She knew she had to act. She called her squad together. We move at first light, she said, voice steady, eyes sharp. We observe, we report, we anticipate. We do not engage unless necessary. Understood? They nodded, silence, respect, fear, trust. At dawn, they moved through the valley again, lighter, faster, more precise. The air smelled of dust, gunpowder, and tension. She led the way, senses alert, scanning every ridge, every shadow, every glint of metal. Hours passed, heat climbed. The enemy remained elusive, but she knew the presence of the man, her shadow from the past, still lingered, waiting, calculating, watching. Her mind wandered briefly to what she had sacrificed to survive this long, the friends she had lost, the moments she had missed, the voice that trembled and the hands that acted. She realized survival wasn't just physical. It was moral, psychological, the constant battle between action and doubt. By midday, they discovered signs of preparation, supplies, makeshift camps, enemy movement patterns. She mapped them silently in her mind, noting weaknesses, choke points, and flanks. Then came the ambush, not random, not chaotic, precision, just like before. Positions, she shouted. Commands cut through the valley like knives. The squad moved seamlessly, covering angles, suppressing fire, retreating where necessary. She spotted him again, the shadow from her past, moving through the enemy lines with deliberate intent. Her pulse tightened. This wasn't just a battle, this was a reckoning. Bullets flew, dust rose, rocks shattered. Every action was mirrored by memory, by survival instinct honed through years of trembling voices transformed into decisive action. And then it happened, a moment of clarity. She knew his pattern. She had studied it from memory and instinct, anticipating his moves. She raised her rifle, finger tightening. Breath held. One shot clean, precise. He faltered, then disappeared into cover. The squad continued the fight, the enemy scattered. By dusk, the valley fell silent once more. Her knees hit the ground, exhaustion claimed her, relief was hollow, victory was temporary. Martinez knelt beside her. "Lieutenant, you saved us again, and him." She shook her head. "Not yet, not until the valley lets me." Later, alone under the stars, she traced the scars on her hands, remembering the valley's fire, the brother she lost, the voice that had trembled and the hands that acted. "Sometimes," she whispered, "dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And she had acted again. But the valley still held its secrets, and the shadow from her past had not yet spoken. Why did the wind carry whispers she couldn't place? Dawn crept over the valley in muted gold, brushing rocks with light that seemed too soft for the violence it had witnessed. Her squad moved like shadows, quiet and deliberate, every step measured, every breath held. The night had offered no rest, only fragmented sleep and memories that refused to loosen their grip. Her mind returned again and again to the figure, the shadow from her past. She could not stop thinking about him. The way he had watched, waited, calculated. And now, with intelligence suggesting another enemy maneuver, she knew he would strike again, more cunning, more deliberate. "Lieutenant, you sure about this?" Martinez asked, voice low, hesitant. His hands trembled as he adjusted his rifle. She did not answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the ridge opposite them, noting every shift in shadow, every glint of metal, every sign of life or movement. She had learned long ago to trust instincts honed in valleys like this, valleys that had tested her, broken her, and remade her. Finally she spoke. "We move forward, watch your flanks, trust your instincts but follow mine." The squad nodded. Respect and fear mingled in their eyes. They had seen her act in impossible circumstances before. They had lived because of her decisions. And yet, even they did not fully understand the weight she carried. How every command was tempered by memory, by trauma, by a trembling voice she had long ago turned into action. They moved through the gullies and ridges with care, dust rising in thin wisps, the valley alive with the possibility of danger. Her rifle was ready, her eyes sharp, her senses honed. Every step brought them closer to the ambush she knew was coming. Hours passed. Heat climbed, sun blazing down, but the valley held its secrets tightly. She traced patterns in the rocks, predicted enemy movement, adjusted the squad's formation. She felt it, presence, calculation, a predator watching its prey. And then she saw him. The shadow from her past moved among the enemy lines, orchestrating the attack, silent and lethal. Her pulse quickened, every muscle tensed. "Lieutenant, there," Martinez pointed, voice sharp. She raised her rifle, sighting the figure. Recognition hit like fire. Memories of the valley years ago, the screams, the fire, the hand she could not save, flashed vividly. This was no longer just a mission. This was reckoning. The ambush began. Enemy fire erupted with precision, forcing the squad to scatter. Dust spiraled, rocks shattered, bullets whistled past. Her voice cut through the chaos, commanding, directing, precise. "Left flank, cover, suppressive fire now." The squad followed, moving with her, trusting her instinct over panic, discipline over fear. Every shot she fired, every command she gave, echoed the lessons of survival she had learned in her youth. The trembling voice of that girl in the valley had been replaced by decisive action. Yet even as she fought, doubt crept in. What if he's faster than I am? What if he anticipates my every move? She pushed it aside. No time for doubt, only action. The fight stretched into hours. Heat burned, dust clung, muscles screamed, but she did not relent. She kept directing fire, marking positions, anticipating enemy moves, keeping her squad alive. And then came the betrayal. From a ridge she had cleared earlier, a shot rang out, not from the enemy but from one of their own. One of the new recruits, panicked, had misjudged a movement and fired, wounding Hawkins. She froze, heart in her throat. "Hold fire, watch your angles," she shouted. Martinez moved to Hawkins, stabilizing him. Hawkins groaned, clutching his arm. She pressed a hand to his shoulder. "It's okay, focus, we move now." The squad regrouped under her guidance, shaken but alive. She did not curse the recruit. Fear could turn anyone's hand into a weapon. She had been that girl once, trembling, alone, terrified. The enemy, sensing hesitation, pressed harder. She raised her rifle, firing, suppressing, moving, guiding her squad through cover. Every decision was a calculation, a lifeline, a step towards survival. And then he appeared. The shadow from her past moved forward, not hiding, not running, not retreating. Calm, calculated, intent. Her mind sharpened. Every instinct, every memory, every lesson coalesced. This was the moment she had been preparing for. This was the reckoning she had anticipated, feared, and yet longed for. The enemy faltered, confused by her precision. She directed the squad's fire, forcing them into retreat, isolating the figure she knew she had to face. Hours later, the valley fell silent again. Dust settled, blood dried, the sun dipped below the ridges, painting stone in red and gold. Her squad gathered, exhausted, battered, alive. Martinez knelt beside her. "Lieutenant, you led us through that. You saved us again." She shook her head. "I didn't save myself, I just made sure you did." Hawkins, still grimacing from his wound, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not just a soldier, you're something else, something rare. Today you carried us." She didn't answer. Words could not capture the weight of memory, the cost of survival, the trembling that had never truly left her. Alone later, under a blanket of stars, she traced scars along her hands, remembering fire, screams, loss, and survival. She whispered softly, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And she had acted again. But the valley still held secrets. The shadow from her past had not yet spoken, and she knew it would return, bringing not just danger but a reckoning that would test everything she had become. Why did the silence feel like it was breathing? She crouched atop the ridge, scanning the valley below with eyes that had learned to see the unseen. Dust drifted lazily through the air, but she knew better. She could feel it, movement, calculation, waiting. The shadow from her past had returned, and this time it wasn't just observation. It was intent. "Lieutenant," Martinez's voice cracked over the comm. "They're regrouping, North Ridge, estimated 60 enemy." Her pulse tightened, fingers gripping her rifle. "We don't engage unless necessary. Observe, report, anticipate." Her voice was steady, clipped. She could feel the trembling deep inside, the one that had haunted her since the valley first tried to swallow her, but it stayed buried beneath action. The squad moved under her guidance, shadows among rocks and gullies, careful, precise. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. She had learned to move like this long ago, when the valley had been merciless, when survival depended on calculation, not courage alone. Hours passed. Sun climbed, burned, shadows stretched. The enemy moved with purpose, unaware they were being watched, unaware that someone knew their every move before they made it. Then she saw him. The shadow, the figure she had been avoiding in her mind, haunting her memory, orchestrating the attacks. He stepped from cover, rifle in hand, calm, deliberate, like a predator testing the waters. Her heart clenched. Recognition hit her in waves. The past and present collided. Every memory of fire, screams, and loss surged forward. The trembling voice of her childhood was alive again in her mind, but this time it had hands that acted. "Lieutenant," Martinez whispered, "do we?" "Hold," she said, eyes locked on the figure. "Wait for the right moment. He's waiting for me to act. Don't give him that." The squad obeyed, tense, silent, trusting her instincts over fear. She remembered the first time she had faced him, though she hadn't known it at the time. He had been there, a shadow in the valley, watching her crawl through rubble, watching her tremble, waiting for her to fail. And she had survived. Now she would not just survive, she would confront him. The valley erupted suddenly. Enemy fire closer this time, forcing the squad to scatter. Dust spiraled, rocks shattered, bullets whistled past. Her voice cut through the chaos, commanding, directing, precise. "Cover fire, move low, don't expose yourselves." Every shot she fired, every order she gave, was infused with memory and determination. The squad followed, their lives hinging on her decisions. She calculated angles, predicted movement, anticipated attack. Every muscle, every nerve, every thought was tuned for survival and strategy. Hours passed in a blur, dust clung to sweat-slicked skin, muscles screamed, breath burned, and still she focused on him. The shadow from her past moved methodically, almost ritualistically, through the chaos, guiding enemy actions. Then came the moment she had been preparing for. He broke cover, advancing deliberately toward her squad, exposing himself briefly as if testing her resolve. Her rifle rose, finger tightening, breath controlled. Time seemed to slow. Every memory of the valley, every lesson of survival, every trembling voice that had become action, culminated in this moment. The squad moved instinctively under her commands, creating a path for confrontation. Martinez and Hawkins covered flanks. The younger recruits held positions, firing at enemies she directed. She moved alone toward the shadow. And then it happened. They faced each other across the valley floor, dust swirling, sun bleeding into the horizon. Silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bow. Memories collided, screams, fire, loss, and survival. He raised an eyebrow, almost a smile, as if acknowledging her presence. She did not flinch. "You've survived," he said, voice low, calm. "I've acted," she replied, voice steady, unshaken. He circled, predator-like, testing. She mirrored, calculating, anticipating. Every step, every twitch of muscle, every glance was measured, silent communication of intent. Then the valley erupted again. Enemy forces pressed forward, unaware of the confrontation unfolding. But she did not falter. Every command, every shot she gave, every move she made was designed to protect her squad, neutralize the threat, and finally confront the figure who had haunted her. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, with a single, deliberate movement, she forced him to retreat behind cover. The enemy faltered, confused, giving her squad the advantage. She directed them flawlessly, guiding every movement, suppressing fire, creating chaos for the enemy while minimizing risk to her squad. Every action reflected years of trembling voices, transformed into decisive, life-saving movement. By nightfall, the enemy had scattered. The valley was silent again, dust settling, blood drying, adrenaline ebbing. The squad gathered, exhausted, battered, alive. Martinez knelt beside her. "Lieutenant, you led us through that. You saved us again." She shook her head. "I didn't save myself, I just made sure you did." Hawkins, grimacing from wounds, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not just a soldier, you're something else, something rare. Today you carried us." She did not answer. Words could not capture the weight of memory, the cost of survival, the trembling that had never truly left her. Alone under the stars, she traced the scars along her hands, remembering fire, screams, and loss. She whispered softly, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She had acted again. But the valley held one last truth, one final reckoning, one shadow she had yet to confront. And she knew, deep in her bones, that when it came, she would meet it not with a trembling voice, but with the hands and mind of someone who had survived, who had acted, who had endured. Why did the night feel like it was holding its breath? The valley stretched below, a theater of dust and shadow, of memory and loss. The enemy had scattered, but she knew better. Silence was never peace. Not here, not now, not after everything that had happened. She crouched on the ridge, rifle in hand, eyes scanning every movement, every shadow. The squad moved behind her, silent, tense. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured, every heartbeat matched hers. Martinez's voice cracked over the comm. "Lieutenant, intel suggests the enemy is consolidating. Northern Ridge, reinforcements." Her pulse tightened, fingers gripped the rifle. "We move at first light. Observe, report, anticipate. No engagement unless necessary." She felt the trembling voice rise inside her. Not fear, not panic, not hesitation. It was memory echoing through her like a warning, a reminder, a lesson. She had survived this valley before. She had acted when survival demanded it. She would act again. Hours passed. Dust rose in thin wisps. Sun climbed, burned, shadows stretched. The enemy moved with purpose, unaware that she was watching, calculating, predicting. Then she saw him, the shadow from her past, orchestrating the enemy movements, calm, deliberate, predator-like. Her chest tightened. Memories surged: fire, screams, loss, abandonment, survival. The trembling voice of her childhood rose and then, as always, transformed into action. "Lieutenant," Martinez whispered, "do we?" "Hold," she said, eyes locked on the figure. "Wait for the right moment. He's testing me. Don't give him that." The squad obeyed, tense, silent, trusting her instincts. The enemy pressed, but she was ready. Every calculation, every lesson, every trembling voice turned to decisive action. Suppressive fire, calculated movement, flanking maneuvers. She led them flawlessly, keeping her squad alive while minimizing exposure. Hours blurred. Heat pressed, dust clung, muscles screamed. And still she focused on him. The shadow moved methodically, orchestrating chaos while remaining calm, unbroken. Then came the final confrontation. He stepped from cover, rifle in hand, facing her directly. She raised her rifle, finger tightening. Breath held. Every memory of fire, screams, loss, survival surged through her. "You've survived," he said, voice low, deliberate. "I've acted," she replied, voice steady, unshaken. They circled, predator and prey reversed and intertwined, each movement calculated, each glance loaded with history. Every step, every twitch of muscle, every thought was a communication of intent, a test, a reckoning. The squad moved instinctively under her commands, securing angles, creating openings, suppressing enemy fire. Every action was a thread woven into survival, a tapestry of resilience. Then he charged, moving through chaos with lethal precision. She held her ground, calculating, anticipating. Shots rang out, dust exploded, rocks shattered. The valley became a crucible, testing everything she had become. She acted. Precision, control, every movement measured, every shot calculated. She forced him to retreat, isolated, vulnerable. The enemy faltered. Her squad pressed forward under her guidance, turning chaos into advantage. Finally, the valley fell silent. Dust settled, blood dried, adrenaline ebbed. She lowered her rifle, knees shaking, breath ragged. Her squad gathered, battered, alive, staring at her with awe and relief. Martinez knelt beside her. "Lieutenant, you led us through that. You saved us again." She shook her head. "I didn't save myself. I just made sure you did." Hawkins, wounded but alive, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not just a soldier. You're something rare. Today you carried us." She did not answer. Words could not capture the weight of memory, the cost of survival, the trembling that had never truly left her. Alone later, under a blanket of stars, she traced the scars on her hands. She remembered fire, screams, loss, and survival. She whispered softly, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She had acted again. But the valley still held its secrets, its shadows, its ghosts. She knew the figure from her past had been a test, a reckoning, a reminder that survival was never just physical. It was moral, psychological, a battle between memory and action. The squad gathered around her the next morning, preparing to leave the valley. Their expressions were a mix of exhaustion, relief, and respect. She had led them through fire and blood, through trembling voices transformed into decisive action. As they moved out, the wind whispered through rocks, carrying dust, carrying memory, carrying the echoes of all they had endured. She glanced back one last time, the valley stretching endlessly, beautiful and deadly, full of memories and ghosts. She whispered to herself softly, almost reverently, "The valley remembers, and so do I." Her voice no longer trembled, not because she had no fear, not because the memories had faded, but because she had learned the truth. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is action. She led her squad down the ridge, moving away from shadows, toward light, toward survival, toward life. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured, every heartbeat a promise. The valley remained behind them, silent, enduring. The enemy scattered, their plans undone, their force diminished. The shadow from her past had retreated, defeated not just by bullets, but by resolve, by will, by a trembling voice that had been transformed into action. As they reached the convoy, she paused for a moment, looking at her squad. Faces battered, eyes wary, bodies exhausted. They were alive because she had acted. Martinez approached, voice low. "Lieutenant, what now?" She looked at him, at the squad, at the valley that had taken so much and taught so much. She exhaled, letting the weight fall from her shoulders just slightly, and said, "Now we live, and we remember." The convoy started moving, engines rumbling, dust rising once again. She stayed at the rear, eyes scanning, senses alert, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. She had faced her past. She had survived. She had acted. And in the quiet moments, as the valley disappeared behind them, she whispered one last time, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And sometimes, action is all that is needed to echo across a battlefield forever.